Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we step aboard the evening train from Winchester to London in the 1920s, where the Hampshire countryside cloaks itself in dusk. Hercule Poirot, with his impeccable logic, and Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, find their journey interrupted at the quiet Badsham Junction. What begins as a routine delay unfurls into a chilling mystery. A man lies dead on the tracks. Edmund Blackwood, antiquities dealer, his demise no mere accident, but a murder most cunning. Join us for the 5:40 to London, a tale of deception, deduction, and justice, woven in the timeless spirit of Agatha Christie. Her influence revered, though this path is ours alone. Before we embark, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence fuels these shadowed tales. Now settle in as the train departs and the mystery begins. Chapter 1. An unexpected delay. The evening train from Winchester to London rumbled through the Hampshire countryside, its carriages swaying gently in the gathering dusk. The compartment was warm and well appointed, the air faintly tinged with leather, cold smoke, and the aftertaste of strong English tea. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat comfortably opposite my friend Hercule Poirot, whose neatness and composure seemed untouched by the journey. Poirot, as ever, was the picture of meticulous order. His egg-shaped head was inclined in thought, his hands folded atop a silk handkerchief, and his mustache, glossy black and fiercely waxed, twitched now and then, as if in silent debate with itself. Not a crease in his suit was out of place, and the glint of his polished shoes caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window. We had only recently concluded a case at Lord Pembroke's estate, a matter involving a stolen medieval manuscript and a most unfortunate librarian. The memory of Poirot's theatrical unmasking of the culprit and the subsequent confession still lingered in my mind. "Mon ami," Poirot said suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. "You are pensive this evening." "The case? It fatigues. You not at all?" "Not at all, Poirot," I replied, though I felt the pleasant weariness that follows a challenge well met. "I was simply reflecting on your methods, the way you deduced that Whitmore had hidden the manuscript in the chimney. Quite brilliant." Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. "It was the psychology, Hastings. A man who works with books. He thinks of places where books are kept safe from damp. And what is drier than a disused chimney?" But he paused, raising a finger. "Do you notice, Hastings? The train? It slows." Indeed, the steady rhythm of the wheels was diminishing. The conductor's whistle sounded ahead, and the brakes hissed as we approached a small country station, its platform illuminated by wavering pools of gaslight. The sign, barely visible in the dusk, read, "Badsham Junction." "I don't recall this being a scheduled stop," I remarked. Poirot leaned forward, his green eyes sharpening. "Something has occurred. Observe, Hastings, the agitation of the railway staff." On the platform, the portly station master hurried to and fro, followed by a young porter carrying a stretcher. Their faces were grave. The air outside was crisp, tinged with wood smoke and the faint scent of damp earth. A well-dressed gentleman of about 50, with graying whiskers and an expensive overcoat, appeared in the corridor. I had noticed him earlier at Winchester, where he seemed unusually nervous, checking his pocket watch and glancing about with furtive anxiety. "Perhaps we should inquire," I suggested. "Précisément," Poirot replied. "When the routine is disturbed, there is always something to be learned." We stepped onto the platform, joining a small group of passengers near the station master. The gas lamps flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the weathered bricks. The station master, perspiring despite the chill, addressed us with a harried air. "Gentleman's been found dead on the track, sir," he explained, mopping his brow. "About a mile down the line. Struck by the goods train that passed through about an hour ago. Terrible business. Terrible." Poirot's expression grew grave. "And this necessitates our delay?" "I'm afraid so. The inspector's been summoned from Corfield, and we can't proceed until the authorities have examined the scene. Shouldn't be more than an hour or two, I hope." The nervous gentleman from our corridor had drawn closer. His face was pale in the lamplight. When he heard the station master's words, his hands trembled as he withdrew a silver cigarette case from his waistcoat. "How dreadful," he murmured, though his tone was oddly strained. "Do we know who the poor fellow was?" The station master replied. "A Mr. Edmund Blackwood, sir. We found a business card in his wallet. Edmund Blackwood, Antiquities, Caron Street, London. Looks like he dealt in antiquities. Had a shop in the city." At the name, the gentleman's cigarette case slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the platform. He bent to retrieve it, his hands shaking noticeably. "Forgive me," he said, straightening up. "The shock of it all. You understand, such a terrible accident." Poirot's keen eyes did not miss this display of agitation. "You knew this gentleman, perhaps, Monsieur Pemberton?" The man replied quickly. "Cornelius Pemberton. No, I didn't know him personally. One hears of these art dealers you know, professional acquaintances, as it were." "Uh-huh. You are also in the art business?" "In a small way. Yes. Ceramics and glassware. Nothing as grand as antiquities." Pemberton's laugh sounded forced. "I've just been to Winchester. On business. A rather disappointing trip, I'm afraid." The station master cleared his throat. "If you gentlemen would care to wait in the waiting room, there's a fire laid and tea available. Shouldn't be too long now." "Most kind," said Poirot. "But perhaps if it would not be too much trouble, we might remain on the platform? I have some small experience in these matters and would like to speak with the inspector when he arrives." The station master looked puzzled for a moment, then his expression cleared. "Poirot? I believe I've heard the name mentioned in the papers, sir. Of course, any assistance would be most welcome." As we waited, I noticed Mr. Pemberton lighting a cigarette, drawing on it with evident nervousness. He fumbled with a crumpled packet of machine-made cigarettes. The orange glow illuminated his face, revealing an expression of barely controlled anxiety. "An interesting gentleman, that Mr. Pemberton," Poirot murmured, as we walked a little apart. "Indeed, most curious reaction to the news of a stranger's death." "Come, Hastings," he said quietly. "Let us wait and observe. Often it is in such moments, when routine is disturbed, that the smallest detail reveals the most." He turned his gaze to the darkened tracks beyond the station. Lights, thoughtful, composed. The night seemed to hold its breath, as though the answer to the mystery hovered just out of reach. And so, with the cold settling in and the promise of answers yet to come, we waited. Chapter 2. The Body on the Rails. Inspector Bradshaw's arrival lent the station an air of official gravity. He was a sturdy, middle-aged man, his boots echoing on the flagstones as he entered the platform. His blue eyes were sharp beneath a battered trilby. He paused, surveying the small group assembled. Near the station office, Poirot stepped forward with a slight bow. "Inspector Bradshaw, I presume? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hercule Poirot, a consulting detective, and this is my friend, Captain Hastings. If I may be of assistance in your investigation, I would be most grateful for the opportunity to help." "I see," said Bradshaw. "Well, Mr. Poirot, any assistance from an experienced investigator would be most welcome." Poirot gestured to the station master. "Williams here has briefed us on the situation. I trust we may examine the body and the scene together?" "Certainly," Bradshaw replied. "Williams, lead the way." We followed the inspector, the station master, and 2 constables to a room at the far end of the platform. There, on a wooden table, lay the body of a man of perhaps 45. Well dressed in a dark suit and overcoat, his features bearing the terrible marks of his encounter with the train. Poirot's methodical precision was on full display as he began his examination. He bent over the body, his gaze moving from the victim's face to his hands, then to the clothing and shoes. He examined the boots with particular care, lifting one gently with his gloved hand. "Hastings," he said quietly, "observe the condition of this gentleman's boots." I looked down. The boots were of good quality leather, well polished, but I could see nothing particularly remarkable about them. "They appear quite clean," I ventured. "Précisément," Poirot replied. "For a man who supposedly walked across rough country to reach the railway line, they are remarkably free of mud, grass stains, or any other evidence of such a journey. Most interesting, no." Poirot then inspected the victim's hands, noting the clean, manicured nails and the absence of defensive wounds. He glanced at the face, lingering for a moment on the set of the jaw and the slight swelling around the lips. As he straightened, Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And here, Hastings, do you see these small crumbs? Old cake, if I am not mistaken, a detail easily overlooked, yet it may prove most revealing." He then bent closer to the hem of the trousers and the soles of the boots, producing a small pair of tweezers from his pocket. "And now, another detail. Look closely. Here are fibers, red wool, blue cotton, and yellow jute. These are not the sort of thing one picks up in a field or on the open road. No, mon ami. These are the unmistakable traces of a cheap domestic carpet." Suddenly Poirot's attention sharpened. "Inspector Hastings, observe here, above the left temple. There is a scalp wound, fresh and bleeding." He bent closer, his eyes narrowing. "But it is not the wound itself that interests me most. It is the pattern of the blood." He traced the dried blood thoughtfully. "See? One stream has run down the side of the face toward the collar, and another has trickled from the wound toward the back of the head. This is not the chaotic dispersal one would expect from a blow by a locomotive. No. The blood has flowed in 2 distinct directions, downward, as if the man were upright, and then backward, as if he were lying face upward." Bradshaw frowned. "Couldn't that be the result of the train's impact?" Poirot shook his head gently. "None, Inspector. The violence of a locomotive would cause a chaotic pattern, scattering not these orderly flows. The laws of gravity do not change. Blood flows downward from a wound according to the position of the body at the time. For it to flow both down the face and then back along the scalp, the victim must first have been upright, then laid on his back after the wound was inflicted, but before he was placed face down on the tracks." Inspector Bradshaw leaned in. "Williams, what did you find on the body?" The station master produced a wallet, a gold pocket watch, a silver cigarette case, and a leather portfolio. His wallet contained a business card. "Edmund Blackwood, Antiquities, Caron Street, London." The portfolio has business correspondence, invoices, and letters. There's also some money, and this diamond pin from his tie. Poirot examined the items with care, paying particular attention to the cigarette case and the contents of the portfolio. Everything is potentially significant, Inspector. Tell me, were there any other valuables found? Jewelry, precious stones, anything that would suggest he was carrying merchandise? Nothing beyond what you see here, Williams replied. The watch is gold, certainly, and there's the diamond pin, but nothing that would suggest he was carrying a collection of antiquities. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Yet we know from the business card and letters that Mr. Blackwood dealt in antiquities, valuable items that dealers often carry with them. You think he was robbed? Bradshaw inquired. I think, Inspector, that we must consider all possibilities. But first, let us examine the scene where the body was discovered. The physical evidence there may tell us much. We left the lamp room and made our way down the permanent way, guided by the station master. The October evening was crisp and clear, the last traces of daylight lingering in the sky as the sun dipped below the horizon. Gas lamps along the platform were casting long shadows across the rails. The scene of the tragedy was marked by the presence of several railway officials and the goods train driver, Jenkins, who had remained to give his statement. Jenkins, Inspector Bradshaw called to the driver, tell us exactly what you saw. The driver, a grizzled man in his 50s, stepped forward nervously. Well, sir, I was coming, around the curve there. Not going fast, mind you, as we always slow for the junction, when my headlights picked up something on the track ahead. And what exactly did you see? Poirot asked gently. A man, sir, lying across the rails face down. He was with his head in the 4-foot way and his body alongside. There was an umbrella and a traveling bag nearby on the ballast. I blew the whistle and applied the brakes, but there wasn't time to stop. Poirot examined the rails carefully, noting the minimal amount of blood present. Most curious, he murmured. In cases of this nature, one would expect considerably more evidence. Inspector Bradshaw was examining the scattered remains of the victim's spectacles. These were found here, broken to pieces. Must have been thrown clear when the engine struck him. May I examine them? Poirot asked, producing a small magnifying glass from his waistcoat pocket. He studied the fragments with intense concentration, occasionally picking up pieces with his handkerchief and holding them to the light. Hastings, he said after several minutes, what do you make of the condition of these spectacles? I looked at the scattered fragments. They appeared to be quite thoroughly broken, reduced almost to powder in some cases. Gravement, I said. But consider, these are thick concave lenses, the type worn by those with severe myopia. When such lenses are struck by a train wheel, they are reduced to fine powder and scattered widely. But observe the pattern of these fragments. He held up several pieces. They are numerous, but not powdered, and they are concentrated in a relatively small area. The pattern suggests they were broken by being trodden upon, then scattered here deliberately. Inspector Bradshaw was beginning to look thoughtful. You're suggesting the man was killed elsewhere and brought here. I am suggesting, Poirot replied, that the evidence points in that direction. But let us continue our examination. Poirot spent several more minutes searching the immediate area, occasionally stooping to pick up small objects, which he deposited in labeled envelopes from his pocket case. What have you found now? I asked, as he carefully preserved what appeared to be a short piece of string, a fragment of hemp and twine with a green strand woven through it. Possibly used to secure something, he replied. Perhaps a bag or umbrella during transport. As we prepared to return to the station, Poirot paused to take one final look at the scene. "Inspector," he said, "I believe we can state with some certainty that this was not an accident. The evidence strongly suggests that Mr. Blackwood was murdered elsewhere, and his body placed here to simulate death by misadventure." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Poirot," Bradshaw replied. "What makes you so certain?" "These combination of factors, Inspector. The scalp wound that bled while the victim was in different positions, first upright, then face upward, cannot be explained by the locomotive. The condition of the boots, the deliberately scattered spectacle fragments, and the absence of valuable merchandise that a dealer would normally carry. Each piece of evidence alone might be explained away, but together they paint a clear picture." "Then we're looking for a murderer," Bradshaw said grimly. "Indeed we are," Poirot replied, "and I suspect, Inspector, that we shall not have to look very far." As we made our way back toward the station, I could see that Poirot's little gray cells were working at full capacity. The familiar signs were all there: the slight forward tilt of his egg-shaped head, the way his fingers unconsciously smoothed his mustache, and that peculiar gleam in his green eyes that appeared whenever he encountered a puzzle worthy of his talents. The station master's lantern bobbed ahead of us as we walked back along the permanent way, and I found myself wondering what revelations the next phase of our investigation might bring. One thing was certain: with Hercule Poirot on the case, the truth would eventually emerge, no matter how cleverly the murderer thought he had concealed it. Chapter 3: The Cottage in the Eight Copse. As we returned along the permanent way, Poirot paused, turning to Inspector Bradshaw and the station master. "Tell me, Williams, are there any houses or cottages near the spot where the body was found?" The station master nodded. "There's only one, sir. Elm Cottage. Just beyond the copse. It's been empty for months, but lately I've seen a light there in the evenings. Odd, really. No one's supposed to be living there." Poirot's eyes brightened. A light in an otherwise deserted cottage, so near to where the body was placed. That is most intriguing. "Inspector," he said, "I suggest we investigate. It is possible our murderer sought shelter there, or perhaps it holds some clue." Bradshaw agreed at once. "It's the only building in the vicinity, and if someone's been there recently, it's well worth a look." The night pressed close about us as we left the railway behind. The distant hiss of the waiting train was a reminder of the world we had momentarily left. Poirot, ever precise, even on a muddy path, picked his way with care, his overcoat buttoned tightly, his hat set at its usual angle. Inspector Bradshaw and the station master Williams accompanied us. Bradshaw's lantern cast long, uncertain shadows as we made our way through the tangled undergrowth. Elm Cottage soon appeared, a modest two-story structure of red brick, its garden wild with neglect. A faint yellow glow flickered in a ground-floor window, the only sign of life in the stillness. Poirot paused, surveying the scene with his customary thoroughness. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "The lamp is oil, not gas. A small detail, but it tells us this place is not often visited by the modern world. And yet, tonight it is occupied." Poirot's gaze dropped to the earth. "And here, what do you see?" The ground, soft from recent rain, bore the unmistakable tracks of a wheelbarrow, the grooves deep and fresh, leading from the garden path to the rear of the house. "A wheelbarrow, and recently used," Bradshaw observed, crouching to inspect the marks. "See how the tracks are pressed into the earth? It was carrying a considerable weight." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Let us follow them." We moved quietly around the cottage, gravel crunching beneath our feet. The distant whistle of the train was a faint punctuation in the night. The tracks led across a neglected kitchen garden, past the withered stalks of last summer's beans, and disappeared into the field beyond, directly toward the railway line. Poirot stopped, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mon ami," he said, "I begin to see how our mystery unfolds. But let us not hurry. We must be thorough." Inspector Bradshaw tried the front door and found it unlocked. "Police? Anyone at home?" There was no answer. The lamp continued to burn in the front room, its glow steady and untroubled. Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "We are justified in entering. The circumstances are most suspicious." Inside, the cottage was chill and musty, the air thick with the scent of dust and old tobacco. The hallway led directly to the sitting room, where the scene that greeted us confirmed Poirot's suspicions. A whiskey bottle stood open on the table beside a siphon and a biscuit box. The oil lamp's light flickered over the shattered remains of a glass tumbler. A wooden chair was overturned near the fireplace, and the small carpet before the hearth was rumpled and skewed. "Signs of a struggle," Bradshaw said grimly, moving to right the chair. "Indeed," Poirot replied, his tone clinical. "But let us examine the precise nature of the disturbance." He knelt beside the chair, his magnifying glass in hand. "See the angle at which it lies, Hastings? It was knocked over by someone falling backward, with force." He pointed to several dark spots on the floorboards. "Blood. Not a great quantity, but enough to confirm violence occurred here." I held the lamp closer as Poirot examined the broken tumbler. This glass was not simply dropped. Observe the pattern. Fragments spread wide. It was struck from someone's hand, with force. Poirot leaned over the whiskey bottle, sniffed delicately. "It is unmistakable, Inspector. There is a faint but characteristic odor, chloral hydrate, or a similar narcotic. It would explain the asphyxia we observed on the body. A man rendered unconscious by such a drug would be unable to resist suffocation." Bradshaw opened the biscuit box. "Oat cakes, the same type of crumbs we found on the deceased's clothing." Poirot nodded. "Each detail fits. Observe also these cigarette ends by the hearth, machine-made, cheap. Our victim smoked fine-cut latakia, hand-rolled. The person who waited here was anxious, passing the time by smoking." He moved to the corner, where a fine gray felt hat with a silk band lay half-hidden behind a settle. "Blackwood's missing hat," Poirot said with satisfaction. The murderer overlooked this in his haste. Poirot's systematic examination of the floor yielded more. "Red wool, blue cotton, yellow jute," he announced, extracting fibers with tweezers. "An exact match for those found on Blackwood's clothing and shoes." "So he was killed here," Bradshaw concluded. "Without question, the evidence is overwhelming." Poirot stood and surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on the tablecloth. "Now, we must determine who has been occupying this cottage." A search of the premises revealed recent habitation, but nothing permanent. In the small upstairs bedroom, we found a leather traveling bag containing a few changes of clothing, a shaving kit, and a railway ticket stub, London to Winchester, dated 2 days ago. "Winchester," I said. "The same route as our train." "Indeed, Hastings," Poirot replied. "The pieces begin to form a pattern." His eyes gleamed. Bradshaw examined the bag's contents. No letters, no cards, nothing with a name. "The absence of identification is itself significant," Poirot noted. A man who travels without papers is either careless or careful. In this case, I suspect the latter. We found no further clues to the occupant's identity. The cottage had been lived in temporarily. That much was clear. Poirot drew the curtains and with a gesture invited us to sit. "We shall remain here, mon ami. The evidence, the atmosphere, the very air of this place, all are essential to the truth. There is no need to return to the station. The answers are here. If only we use our powers of deduction." Bradshaw hesitated, glancing at his watch. "The train can wait a little longer. This is the heart of the affair." Poirot nodded. "Prime, let us gather our thoughts. The truth, I think, is very close." The wind rattled the window panes, and the lamp cast flickering shadows across the battered furniture. The four of us sat in the quiet, the weight of the mystery pressing in from every corner of the room. Poirot's eyes, green and cat-like, surveyed the evidence with serene confidence. "We shall not leave this place," he said softly, "until the matter is resolved." And so, in the cold, lamplit stillness of Elm Cottage, the investigation reached its turning point. Outside, the world waited, but within these walls, the final act was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Sibyl Gathering at Elm Cottage. The sitting room of Elm Cottage was transformed into a stage for revelation. The oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows over the battered furniture and the evidence arrayed on the table: the whiskey bottle, the biscuit box, the broken tumbler, and the rumpled tablecloth. Inspector Bradshaw stood near the window pocket, watch in hand, his expression grave. The station master hovered by the door, anxious to return to the platform. Poirot, however, was the picture of composure, his green eyes bright, his every movement precise, as he arranged the scene for what I sensed would be a decisive confrontation. Poirot cleared his throat. The faintest smile touched his lips. "Mon ami, we are assembled here not merely to satisfy the requirements of the railway timetable, but to ensure that justice is done." What appeared at first glance to be a tragic accident, a man struck down by a passing train, is in truth a most cunningly contrived murder. He gestured to the whiskey bottle and the broken glass. "We begin with an invitation. Mr. Edmund Blackwood, a dealer in antiquities, was lured to this cottage by someone he trusted, someone in the same trade, who could speak knowledgeably of valuable objects. The murderer had rented this cottage temporarily, as evidenced by the sparse belongings and the railway ticket from London to Winchester, found in the upstairs room." Poirot's tone was almost conversational, but his eyes missed nothing. The meeting appeared cordial. Refreshments were offered on the whiskey and oatcakes, but the whiskey, as I detected, had been doctored with chloral hydrate, or a similar narcotic. There is a faint but unmistakable odor, Inspector, and the symptoms we observed on the body, swelling of the tongue, are consistent with such a drug. As Blackwood began to succumb to its effects, he realized his danger. Inspector Bradshaw leaned forward. "The struggle we see evidence of?" "Précisément. The overturned chair tells us Blackwood fell backward, with force. Perhaps as the drug took hold, or as he attempted to resist his attacker. The broken tumbler was struck from his hand, which explains the wide distribution of the glass fragments." Poirot's fingers hovered over the blood spots on the floor. There was violence, but not a great deal of blood, consistent with the small scalp wound we observed. This wound, as the blood flow patterns reveal, was inflicted while Blackwood was upright. Then later, as he lay on his back, still alive. I found myself drawn in, the pieces falling into place. "You're suggesting he was struck, then suffocated?" Indeed, Hastings. The signs of asphyxia were unmistakable. The swollen tongue, the marks on the inside of the lip where the teeth bit down under pressure. I believe the murderer used this very tablecloth to smother his victim after the drug had rendered him helpless. Poirot gestured to the carpet beneath our feet. The carpet fibers found on Blackwood's clothing and shoes, red wool, blue cotton, yellow jute, match this fabric exactly, placing him here during the struggle. It tells us the story of those final terrible moments. The station master coughed, glancing at the clock. Begging your pardon, Mr. Poirot, but the passenger's patience. Mon ami, Poirot said gently but firmly, we are nearly finished. Now, having committed murder, our killer faced the problem of disposal. He could not simply leave the body here. It would be discovered too soon. But he was clever. He conceived a plan to make the death appear accidental. He moved to the window, gesturing toward the railway line. Using the wheelbarrow, whose tracks we observed, he transported the body across the field to the railway. The distance is perhaps 300 yards, difficult for one man, but not impossible if the victim was of slight build, as Blackwood was. Inspector Bradshaw interjected, but why stage it as a railway accident? Because it would appear to be suicide or misadventure, requiring minimal investigation. The murderer positioned the body face down across the rails, with the head in the 4-foot way. He then scattered the broken spectacle fragments to simulate the appearance of an accident, and placed the umbrella and traveling bag nearby. Poirot's voice was almost regretful, but he made several crucial errors. First, he failed to account for the condition of the victim's boots. They remained too clean for someone who had supposedly walked across rough country. Second, the blood flow patterns on the scalp wound told a different story than the one he wished us to believe. Most significantly, he overlooked Blackwood's hat, which remained here in the cottage, a detail no true English gentleman would have neglected on such an evening. I was struck by a sudden thought. But Poirot, how can we be certain who the murderer is? We have no direct evidence linking anyone to this cottage. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, but we do, mon ami. There are the psychological clues. Yes, but also the physical. Consider, for instance, the cigarette ends found by the hearth. He picked up a small ashtray from the table, displaying the stubbed-out butts. These are machine-made, cheap cigarettes, quite unlike the fine-cut Latakia, hand-rolled, that Mr. Blackwood preferred. Our victim was a connoisseur. He would not have smoked these. But I observed on the platform earlier this evening that Monsieur Pemberton was smoking just such a cigarette, machine-made, of the same brand. He smoked nervously, one after another, just as our murderer did while waiting here in the cottage. Inspector Bradshaw frowned. But that's circumstantial evidence at best. True. But consider the psychology, Inspector. Pemberton deals in ceramics and glassware, a photo-related field, that would give him knowledge of Blackwood's business and movements. He would know when Blackwood might be carrying valuable merchandise. The motive is clear. Robbery. Poirot's tone was grave. I believe Pemberton learned that Blackwood would be traveling through this area with a collection of valuable antiquities. He rented this cottage as a base, contacted Blackwood with some pretext, and lured him here. The rest, as we have seen, followed with tragic inevitability. Poirot began pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Blackwood, suspecting nothing, agreed to meet Pemberton, offered refreshment, but the whiskey was drugged. When Blackwood began to resist, Pemberton struck him, then suffocated. Him with the tablecloth, the struggle, the broken glass, the blood, all fit this sequence. The body was then transported by wheelbarrow to the railway, and the scene was staged. A hush fell over the room as Poirot paused. The distant sound of a train whistle echoed through the night. The station master shifted anxiously. Poirot turned to Inspector Bradshaw. "You must search Pemberton's belongings. I am confident you will find the stolen antiquities hidden somewhere. About his person or luggage. A man who commits such a crime in haste often makes the error of keeping the evidence too close." Bradshaw nodded, but his face was troubled. "And if he has already disposed of them? Or if he flees before we act?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "He has not fled. His presence on our train was part of his alibi. But now, faced with exposure, he may act rashly. We must be vigilant." I saw the tension ripple through the group. The case was not yet closed. The threat of escape, of evidence destroyed, of justice denied hung in the air. Poirot's eyes narrowed. His voice, low and urgent. "Let us return to the platform. The truth is revealed. But the game is not yet finished. The criminal, when cornered, is at his most dangerous. We must not allow him to slip through our fingers." As we filed out into the night, the wind rattled the bare branches, and the engine's impatient hiss sounded louder than ever. The passengers gathered in anxious knots turned as we approached. Pemberton stood apart, his face pale, his hands twitching at his sides. Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper as he addressed me. "Watch him closely, Hastings. The denouement is not merely the revelation of truth, but the moment when justice must be secured. We have named our murderer, but the story is not yet done." The night pressed in around the platform, where, among the waiting passengers, a murderer stood, unaware that his carefully laid plans were about to unravel. Chapter 5: The Reckoning at Badsham Junction. After Poirot's revelation in the cottage, we returned to the station. The night air was sharp on our faces. Inspector Bradshaw moved with swift authority, his mind made up. As we reached the platform, he approached Pemberton, who was standing apart, smoking nervously and checking his pocket watch with evident agitation. "Mr. Pemberton," Bradshaw said in a measured tone, "we would value your expertise as a dealer in ceramics and glassware. We've discovered some items that may have belonged to Mr. Blackwood, and your knowledge of such matters would be most helpful. Would you be so good as to accompany us to the station master's office?" Pemberton hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he extinguished his cigarette. With all eyes upon him, he managed a stiff nod. "Of course, Inspector. Anything I can do to help." Inside the station office, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Bradshaw closed the door firmly. Pemberton took a seat, his composure visibly strained. Poirot stood by the window, immaculate as ever. I hovered nearby, notebook in hand. Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Monsieur Pemberton, based on our investigation at Elm Cottage, I must now formally accuse you of the murder of Edmund Blackwood." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Pemberton's face went ashen, his hands gripped the arms of his chair. Bradshaw leaned forward. "Mr. Pemberton, you have heard the accusation. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Pemberton's mask of calm slipped entirely. "It's absurd. I never set foot in that wretched cottage. I was on business in Winchester, as I told you. This is all some elaborate mistake." Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle but unyielding. "Monsieur, the evidence is overwhelming. A railway ticket from London to Winchester was found. In the cottage, the same route you traveled today. The cigarette ends discovered by the hearth are of the same machine-made brand you smoked nervously on the platform this evening, quite unlike Mr. Blackwood's preferred hand-rolled latakia. The carpet fibers found on the victim's clothing and shoes match those from the cottage floor exactly. Poirot paused, his green eyes fixed on Pemberton. Most significantly, you possess knowledge that only the murderer could have. You admitted yourself that you knew of Blackwood through professional circles. One hears of these art dealers, you said, but you also knew he would be traveling through this area today, carrying valuable merchandise. Such specific knowledge of his movements and cargo suggests you had been watching him, perhaps following his business correspondence, or learning of his plans through contacts in the trade. Pemberton's eyes darted about the room, seeking an ally, and finding none. You have no proof. No one saw me. No one can place me at that cottage. Poirot's expression was grave. But we can place you there, monsieur. Allow me to describe precisely what occurred. He turned to Bradshaw and the others. The murder took place earlier this afternoon, well before the London train left Winchester. But the planning began 2 days ago, when you first arrived from London, as evidenced by the railway ticket we found in the cottage. Poirot's voice was calm, relentless. You contacted Blackwood, perhaps through mutual acquaintances, in the art trade, and lured him to Elm Cottage with the promise of a lucrative deal. You offered whiskey and oatcakes, refreshments that concealed a narcotic. When Blackwood began to succumb, there was a struggle. He was struck. Then, suffocated with the tablecloth. The evidence, the broken glass, the blood, the crumbs, the carpet fibers, the drugged whiskey, tells the story. You then transported the body by wheelbarrow across the field to the railway, a distance of some 300 yards. You arranged the scene to suggest an accident or suicide, scattering the spectacles and placing the umbrella and bag nearby. Most cleverly, you left the oil lamp burning in the cottage, a deliberate misdirection to suggest the occupant was still in the vicinity, when in fact you were already on your way back to Winchester, to board the London train as part of your carefully planned alibi. You then hurried back to Winchester, where you cleaned yourself up, and boarded the London train well before it departed. Hastings himself saw you at the station before we left. Bradshaw nodded. The goods train passed the scene and discovered the body after the London train had already departed Winchester. Only then was the alarm raised, and your train stopped at Badsham Junction. Poirot continued. Your presence on the train was intended as an alibi. But the timing betrays you. The murder and body disposal occurred at least an hour before the body was found. You had ample time to return to Winchester and blend in with the other passengers. Pemberton's bravado collapsed. He slumped in his chair, face ashen. It was only meant to be a robbery, he muttered. I never meant he fought back. Bradshaw turned to Poirot. We must search his luggage. If the stolen antiquities are found, that will be proof enough. A tense silence fell as the inspector and a constable escorted Pemberton to the luggage van. The rest of us waited, the minutes stretching interminably. Poirot, never one to waste time, busied himself straightening a stack of timetables on the station master's desk and smoothing an imaginary crease in his gloves. At last, Bradshaw returned, holding aloft a small leather pouch. We found this hidden in the false bottom of Mr. Pemberton's bag. He opened it to reveal a collection of glittering antiquities, rings, brooches, a small ivory carving, all unmistakably valuable. Poirot's gaze was compassionate but firm. You planned carefully, monsieur, but you did not reckon with the human element. Greed blinds, and fear betrays. Bradshaw signaled to the constable who led Pemberton away. The station master exhaled audibly, and the tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a somber relief. Outside, the conductor signaled that the line was clear. The passengers, now free to reboard, did so with subdued voices and sidelong glances at the scene of justice served. Poirot and I lingered on the platform for a moment. The night was still. The crisis passed. Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression thoughtful. Another case closed. "Poirot," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, mon ami. Logic has restored order. Yet I confess, there is always a sadness. The world, it is full of those who would risk all for gain, and those who pay the price." We boarded the train. As it pulled away from Badsham Junction, I glanced back at the dimly lit platform. Poirot sat beside me, silent and composed, his eyes reflecting both satisfaction and a hint of melancholy. "Tell me, Poirot," I ventured, "was there ever any real doubt in your mind?" He smiled faintly. "There is always doubt, Hastings. But one must trust in logic, in psychology, and above all, in the truth that lies beneath the surface. That is the task of the detective, and the comfort of the just." The train gathered speed, the countryside slipping by in darkness. Within the warm compartment, I felt the familiar sense of peace that followed a mystery resolved. Poirot closed his eyes, the faintest smile on his lips, as if already pondering the next puzzle that fate might send his way. And so, with justice done and order restored, we journeyed on into the night, leaving Badsham Junction and its secrets behind us. As the 5:40 to London steams away from Badsham Junction, Hercule Poirot's relentless mind has pierced the veil of deception. Cornelius Pemberton, unmasked as the murderer, sees his intricate plot undone by a trail of overlooked clues, cigarette ends, carpet fibers, and a gentleman's hat left behind. The 5:40 to London proves that no scheme, however clever, can escape the pull of truth. We hope this journey of intrigue has enthralled you, dear listeners. Were you ahead of Poirot, or did the killer's guise hold you until the end? Share your thoughts below. If this tale has stirred your curiosity, like and subscribe to Cafe Tales for more suspenseful nights. Support us with a tip via Super Thanks. And until our next story, may your nights brim with mystery and your days shine with clarity.